The rain hammered against the bus stop's plexiglass shelter like an accusation, each drop a reminder of another day when Victoria Williams had failed to shield her children from a world that saw their deafness as deficiency. At 45, she clutched her worn leather portfolio, containing fashion sketches for a demanding client whose contract barely covered rent, while watching Emma and Noah press their small faces against the glass, fascinated by the storm's visual symphony. 6-year-old twins, born 3 minutes apart, identical in their bright intelligence, but different in how they approached their silent world. Emma, fierce and protective, always positioned herself slightly in front of her brother. Noah, gentle and observant, who noticed details that escaped everyone else, both profoundly deaf since birth, both perfect in ways their father had never learned to accept. Victoria's phone buzzed with familiar dread. Emma pushed classmate. Noah hiding under desk. Emergency meeting required. The text from Riverside Elementary's special needs coordinator landed like a punch she'd been expecting for weeks. She'd rushed from her freelance consultation, reviewing designs for a small boutique chain, to find her children huddled in the principal's office like refugees from a war they hadn't chosen to fight. What happened? Victoria's ASL flowed with hard-won fluency, learned through desperation during the dark months after Richard's ultimatum. Emma's hands moved with angry precision. Kids said we're stupid because we can't hear. Teacher didn't stop them. Tommy grabbed Noah's hearing aid and threw it in the trash. I pushed Tommy because he was laughing. Victoria knelt beside her daughter, her second-hand coat forgotten against the institutional carpet. You're not stupid, sweetheart. You're brilliant. Then why does everyone treat us like we're broken? Noah's signs carried heartbreaking vulnerability. Why won't anyone learn to talk with their hands like us? The questions pierced through every defense Victoria had constructed. 4 years ago, she'd been riding high as a successful fashion industry consultant, married to one of Chicago's most prominent attorneys, planning a future filled with private schools and family vacations. Then came the diagnosis, Richard's impossible demand. Fix this or I'm done. And her choice to sacrifice everything rather than see her children as problems requiring solutions. The bus ride through Chicago's gray afternoon felt endless. Victoria held both twins close, their small bodies warm against her department store coat that she'd owned for 5 years. When the children were diagnosed, she'd made an impossible choice. Abandon her rising career to become their full-time advocate, or continue climbing professionally while they struggled in systems designed for hearing children. Richard had made the choice easier by walking away when she chose their children over his political ambitions. Downtown Chicago blurred past their window. Business people with determined strides, couples sharing expensive umbrellas, families that looked nothing like theirs. Victoria had learned that good intentions couldn't purchase acceptance, that love didn't automatically translate into belonging. The bus stop on State Street offered minimal shelter from the October storm. Victoria pulled her children closer as commuters rushed past, everyone absorbed in their own urgent destinations. Emma and Noah watched the crowd with heightened visual awareness, catching details others missed because their survival depended on reading faces, gestures, environmental cues that hearing people took for granted. That's when they spotted the unfolding crisis across the busy street. A small figure stood alone beneath a convenience store's flickering neon sign, soaked through his thin jacket. A boy, maybe 8 years old, trying desperately to communicate with passing adults through frantic gestures while they walked by with practiced urban blindness. Victoria watched in growing alarm as person after person ignored the child, a businessman checking his phone dismissively, a woman in scrubs shaking her head with tired indifference, teenagers stepping around him like he was street furniture. Emma tugged her mother's sleeve urgently. "Mama, that boy needs help. Why is everyone pretending not to see him?" Before Victoria could formulate an answer, she noticed a man separating himself from the indifferent crowd. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a security guard's uniform beneath a worn canvas jacket. Unlike everyone else, he moved toward the stranded child with purposeful determination. Victoria found herself mesmerized as he approached the boy with careful, deliberate movements. He knelt slowly, hands visible and non-threatening, and then something extraordinary happened that would alter the trajectory of 5 lives forever. His hands began moving in the graceful, expressive poetry of American Sign Language. The boy's reaction was electric, eyes widening as if this stranger had spoken light into his personal darkness. His own small hands flew in response, rapid and grateful, finally finding someone who understood his silent communication. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. In 3 years of navigating her children's world, she had encountered precious few people outside their therapy team who could communicate naturally in ASL. And here was a stranger, a security guard whose uniform suggested working-class employment, signing with the fluency of someone who lived comfortably in both hearing and deaf communities. The beautiful scene was interrupted when a blonde woman in an expensive coat appeared from the store, panic written across her features as she spotted her lost child with a stranger. "Lucas!" she called, rushing toward them with obvious relief. "What happened? Are you okay?" Victoria watched the security guard rise slowly, his hands moving in patient explanation, even as the woman's fear transformed into gratitude. The boy, Lucas, was signing rapidly to his mother, his face bright with the joy of being truly understood by someone new. "That man talks like us," Emma signed to Victoria, wonder evident in her 6-year-old expression. "He sees the boy the way you see us," Noah added with wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. "Like we matter." Victoria felt understanding dawn with startling clarity. She had been wrong about so many assumptions. Wrong about who possessed the capacity for genuine empathy. Wrong about who would demonstrate authentic care. Wrong about the correlation between professional status and human compassion. As the drama across the street resolved with obvious relief and exchanged contact information, Victoria made a decision that surprised her own cautious heart. When their bus arrived, she guided Emma and Noah to seats near the front, but found herself watching through the rain-streaked window as the security guard and the blonde woman continued their conversation. "Mama," Emma signed as the bus pulled away from the curb, "can we meet them? The man who understands hand-talking and the boy who needs friends like us?" Victoria looked at her daughter's hopeful face, then at Noah, who was nodding eagerly, and realized that maybe, just maybe, there were others in this vast, indifferent city who understood that families came in unexpected configurations, that love spoke many languages, and that sometimes the most important conversations happened in complete silence. "Maybe, sweetheart," she signed back, feeling something that resembled hope stirring in her chest for the first time in months. "Maybe we can." Outside the bus windows, Chicago rushed past in watercolor streaks of gray and gold. But Victoria Williams felt the possibility that her children weren't as alone in the world as she'd feared. Perhaps there were others who saw Emma and Noah not as problems requiring expensive solutions, but as remarkable children deserving friendship, acceptance, and the chance to build connections that transcended the limitations others tried to impose. As the bus carried them home to their modest apartment, Victoria began planning how she might engineer another encounter with the security guard and his son, not from desperation, but from growing conviction that some connections were too important to leave entirely to chance. Lincoln Park on Sunday afternoon hummed with the orchestrated chaos of Chicago families. Children's laughter creating a symphony of belonging that Victoria Williams observed from her weathered bench with cautious optimism. 2 weeks had passed since that rain-soaked downtown encounter. 2 weeks of carefully planned, coincidental visits to the same bus stop until she'd finally gathered courage to approach the security guard directly. Marcus Williams sat beside her now, his weekend clothes, worn jeans and a navy sweater, making him appear less like security personnel and more like someone comfortable with both physical labor and quiet contemplation. His son Lucas played with Emma and Noah, their communication a fascinating blend of sign language, creative gestures, and the universal language of childhood acceptance that adults often complicated unnecessarily. "You mentioned freelance fashion consulting," Marcus said during a peaceful moment when the children were absorbed in building elaborate sandcastles. "That sounds like interesting work." Victoria felt familiar discomfort at the question, the careful dance she'd perfected around discussing her professional background. Since walking away from her previous life, she'd grown accustomed to vague answers, to being seen as just another struggling single mother rather than someone who'd once commanded significant respect in Chicago's business community. "Event coordination mostly," she said carefully, watching Emma teach Lucas the sign for creativity while Noah showed him how to incorporate architectural principles into their sand constructions. Fashion week planning, boutique launches, it keeps us housed and fed. Marcus nodded with the understanding of someone who knew about making ends meet through careful budgeting. Steady work matters. After Sarah died, I learned that providing stability for Lucas meant more than just emotional support. It required reliable income and health insurance. "What did you do before security work?" Victoria asked, noting how his hands moved with unconscious precision when he gestured. The small notebook he carried that she'd glimpsed filled with detailed architectural sketches. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his expression growing distant as he watched Lucas laugh soundlessly while Emma showed him increasingly complex finger patterns. "I was an architect," Marcus said finally, "specialized in healthcare facilities, children's hospitals, rehabilitation centers, therapeutic environments, buildings designed around healing rather than just housing expensive medical equipment." Understanding clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle Victoria hadn't realized she was solving. The way he noticed structural details others missed, his intuitive grasp of how physical space affected emotional well-being, those sketches that revealed innovative design elements she'd never seen in traditional architecture. "Why did you stop practicing?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was certain they should cross. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Victoria saw him glance toward Lucas with protective instinct that spoke of deep wounds carefully guarded. "3 years ago, I designed a residential treatment center for children with autism and communication disorders," Marcus began, his voice carrying weight that suggested this story cost him something to tell. "Beautiful facility, everything state-of-the-art, built specifically to help children with various developmental needs thrive in supportive environments." Victoria's heart began pounding, understanding intuitively where this narrative was heading based on the pain in his voice. The contractor cut corners on electrical systems to maximize profit margins. Marcus continued, his voice becoming hollow. Falsified safety inspection reports. Used substandard wiring that should never have passed code review. The playground noise faded into background static as Victoria absorbed the magnitude of what Marcus was carrying. Not just grief over his wife's death, but the crushing weight of professional guilt for designing a building where tragedy had occurred. "Fire broke out during evening therapy sessions when families often stayed late for extended treatments," Marcus said. "Sarah was there. She worked as a speech therapist, often remained after hours with children who had severe communication difficulties. When the fire started, she tried to evacuate everyone." "Marcus," Victoria said softly, reaching toward him instinctively before catching herself. "That wasn't your fault. The contractor's criminal violations—" "Doesn't matter what the legal investigation concluded," he interrupted quietly. "Those families trusted my design to keep their children safe. Sarah trusted it enough to risk her life protecting kids who couldn't protect themselves. I can't look at architectural plans without seeing her face, without wondering what I missed, what I should have designed differently." Victoria stared at this man who had abandoned his calling because he blamed himself for someone else's criminal negligence, who worked solitary night shifts because he couldn't bear to create spaces that might fail the people who needed them most. "The treatment center," she said carefully. "The children Sarah was trying to save. What happened to them?" "All 11 survived because of her courage," Marcus replied, his voice soft with remembered pride and ongoing grief. "The facility was rebuilt with even more comprehensive safety systems. It's still operating, still helping families navigate challenges similar to what we face with our children." "Then she died ensuring your design fulfilled its true purpose," Victoria said firmly. "Your building didn't kill her, Marcus. It gave her the opportunity to be exactly who she was, someone who would sacrifice everything to protect children who couldn't protect themselves. Your architecture created the space where her heroism could save 11 young lives." Their conversation was interrupted by Lucas running over, his usual silent approach replaced by excited energy that suggested something important was happening. He tugged his father's sleeve and pointed toward the playground entrance, his young face showing confusion rather than his typical wariness around strangers. Victoria followed his gaze and felt her blood freeze with recognition and mounting dread. A man in an expensive charcoal suit stood at the park's entrance, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the autumn breeze. Beside him stood a professional woman Victoria didn't recognize, Severe, efficient, making notes on a tablet with mechanical precision that suggested official documentation. Richard Sterling. Her ex-husband, looking exactly as he had during their divorce proceedings 3 years earlier. Impeccably dressed, strategically positioned, radiating the kind of confidence that came from never doubting his right to occupy any space he chose. Mama? Emma had noticed the shift in adult energy, her signing small and worried as she approached with Noah close behind, both children instinctively seeking protection from whatever threat they sensed in their mother's sudden tension. Victoria's mind raced through possibilities, none offering comfort or reassurance. Richard had maintained complete silence since their divorce was finalized, had shown zero interest in the children he'd once called genetic disappointments, who would destroy his political aspirations. His sudden appearance, accompanied by what appeared to be professional documentation, triggered every protective instinct she'd developed over 3 years of single parenting. Marcus seemed to sense the atmospheric change, his attention shifting from casual conversation to alert assessment. "What's wrong?" "That's my ex-husband," Victoria said, her voice barely steady as she watched Richard's predatory gaze find them across the playground. "Richard Sterling. He's never visited the children since our divorce. I cannot understand why he's here now." Richard spoke briefly to his companion, who nodded and made additional notes with systematic precision. Then, with the casual cruelty that had characterized their marriage and defined their divorce proceedings, he turned and walked away without any acknowledgement of his children's existence. No greeting for Emma and Noah, no explanation for his surveillance, just observation, calculation, and the kind of cold assessment that had made him one of Chicago's most successful and feared family law attorneys. Victoria's phone buzzed immediately. Interesting social choices, Victoria. Very diverse playground companions. Documentation complete for preliminary assessment. Her hands trembled as she read the message, the threat implicit but unmistakably clear. Marcus leaned closer, his expression darkening as he absorbed the implications of Richard's strategic appearance. "He's building a legal case," Victoria whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "Documenting my relationships, my parenting decisions, my questionable social associations. He wants to take Emma and Noah away from me." The playground suddenly felt exposed, dangerous. Every parent now looked like a potential witness. Every moment of natural connection between Marcus and her children seemed like evidence of poor judgment, inappropriate relationships, failure to maintain proper boundaries in her children's lives. "Why now?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the protective edge she'd heard when he spoke about Lucas's needs. "After 3 years of complete absence?" Victoria looked at her twins, Emma teaching Lucas elaborate clapping games that incorporated sign language storytelling, Noah building sand sculptures that revealed sophisticated understanding of spatial relationships and engineering principles. They were thriving. For the first time since Richard abandoned them, they had found friendship, acceptance, belonging that had nothing to do with hearing or speaking, but everything to do with being valued for their intelligence, creativity, and capacity for joy. "Because he's seeing me build something that doesn't include him," Victoria realized with devastating clarity. And Richard Sterling has never tolerated being excluded from anything he considers valuable or potentially useful to his reputation. That evening, Victoria sat in their small apartment's living room, second-hand furniture that was clean and comfortable but spoke of careful budgeting. Staring at her laptop screen, she'd been researching Richard's recent cases, trying to understand his legal strategy, when she discovered something that fundamentally changed her understanding of her own situation. A knock at her door interrupted her research. She found Marcus standing in the hallway, his expression serious but determined, carrying what appeared to be architectural drawings under his arm. "Victoria, I've been thinking about your ex-husband's threat, about what he might use against you in family court proceedings." "Marcus, you don't understand how Richard operates," Victoria began, fear evident in her voice. "He doesn't make idle threats or pursue cases he can't win. If he's building a custody challenge, then maybe it's time you stopped hiding from who you really are," Marcus said quietly, his words carrying unexpected weight. Victoria felt confusion ripple through her understanding. "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a news article from 4 years earlier. The headline read, "Sterling Fashion Group founder sacrifices billion-dollar empire for special needs children." Victoria's breath caught as she saw her own photograph. Younger, more polished, wearing the kind of tailored executive suit that cost more than her current monthly rent. "You're not just some struggling freelance consultant scraping by on event planning contracts," Marcus said gently. "You're Victoria Sterling, the woman who built one of the most innovative fashion companies in American history. You walked away from everything, a $1.2 billion valuation, to advocate for your children." The silence that followed felt like a dam breaking inside Victoria's chest. She had worked so hard to bury her corporate identity, to become just another single mother navigating special needs parenting challenges, that she'd almost forgotten her own power and accomplishments. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Since our second meeting," Marcus admitted. "I researched you after Richard's surveillance visit because I needed to understand what we might be facing legally. Victoria, do you realize what you sacrificed? You were featured on Forbes, Fortune, Harvard Business Review. You revolutionized sustainable fashion manufacturing and changed how the industry thinks about ethical production. And none of that matters now," Victoria said defensively, old wounds about professional sacrifice reopening. "I chose Emma and Noah over corporate success because they needed me more than shareholders needed profits." "It matters," Marcus said firmly, his voice carrying conviction that surprised her, "because it proves you're not some unstable single mother making poor decisions out of desperation. You're a proven leader who sacrificed everything for your children's welfare. That's not weakness or instability. That's exactly the kind of strength that wins custody battles." Victoria stared at him, beginning to understand the strategic implications of revealing her true background and professional accomplishments. "There's something else," Marcus continued, his voice growing excited as he unrolled the architectural drawings he'd brought. "I've been working on plans for a communications center designed specifically for deaf children. Something I started designing after meeting Lucas. Something Sarah would have wanted to see built. But I don't have the business connections or philanthropic network to make it reality." He showed her detailed, innovative designs that integrated therapeutic and educational spaces in ways Victoria had never encountered. Architecture that truly understood how deaf children experienced and navigated physical environments. "You do," Marcus said simply, his eyes bright with possibility. "Victoria Sterling still has contacts throughout Chicago's philanthropic community, people who would fund this kind of revolutionary project if the right person presented it with proper business planning and community impact projections." Victoria studied the architectural plans, seeing not just buildings but possibilities, spaces where children like Emma, Noah, and Lucas could thrive, where families could find genuine community, where her corporate experience could serve something infinitely more meaningful than quarterly profit reports. "Partners?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying hope and determination in equal measure. Victoria looked at this man who had rediscovered his professional calling by believing in hers, who saw potential where she'd learned to see only limitation and loss. "Partners," she agreed, feeling pieces of her life aligning in ways she'd never imagined possible when she first walked away from Sterling Fashion Group. As Marcus left that night with preliminary plans for approaching Chicago's major foundations, Victoria returned to her laptop with renewed purpose. But instead of researching Richard's legal strategies, she began making calls to contacts she hadn't spoken with in 4 years. Philanthropic foundations, corporate donors, business leaders who remembered Victoria Sterling's reputation for turning ambitious visions into funded reality. By morning, she had secured preliminary meetings with 3 major Chicago foundations, interested in innovative approaches to special needs education and community building. Richard Sterling had made a fundamental miscalculation. He'd assumed that Victoria Williams was diminished, weakened by her choice to prioritize her children over corporate advancement. He was about to discover that some transformations made people stronger rather than weaker, and that the most dangerous opponent was someone with nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for. The Morrison Foundation occupied an entire floor of the prestigious Merchandise Mart, their conference room windows offering commanding views of the Chicago River, and the kind of philanthropic influence that could reshape entire communities with a single funding decision. Victoria Sterling, she'd reclaimed her professional name for this crucial meeting, sat at the polished mahogany table with hands steady, despite everything at stake, watching the foundation board review architectural drawings that represented more than innovative building plans. Marcus Williams sat beside her, his presentation materials organized with the precision of someone who understood this moment would determine whether his architectural vision became transformative reality or remained relegated to late-night sketches in a security guard's notebook. The Williams Sterling Communication Center, Marcus was saying, his voice gaining confidence as he entered familiar professional territory, would serve as a comprehensive resource hub for deaf children and their families throughout the Chicago metropolitan area. Not merely sign language instruction or basic accommodation, but genuine community building, advanced therapeutic support, and revolutionary educational advocacy. Dr. Sarah Morrison, the foundation's president and daughter of its philanthropist founder, leaned forward with obvious interest as she studied the detailed drawings. Innovative architecture that incorporated visual communication systems into the building's fundamental design, therapeutic spaces that felt like homes rather than sterile medical facilities. Mr. Williams, Dr. Morrison said with growing enthusiasm, these designs represent exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach our foundation was created to support. The seamless integration of educational and therapeutic functions, the sophisticated attention to sensory considerations for children with different communication needs. This could fundamentally revolutionize how we approach deaf education nationwide. Board member James Chen raised a practical concern with attorney-like precision. However, we must address financial realities. This project would require approximately $14 million for complete implementation. What assurance do we have that this represents sound philanthropic investment rather than well-intentioned but unrealistic idealism? Victoria felt her moment arriving like a familiar crescendo from her corporate days. She stood with the natural authority that had once commanded Fortune 500 boardrooms, her business training reasserting itself with surprising ease after 4 years of deliberate obscurity. If I may address the business case and long-term sustainability projections, Victoria said, her voice carrying the confidence that had once made her legendary in high-stakes negotiations, watching recognition begin to dawn on several faces around the table as board members processed her professional presence and executive demeanor. You seem familiar, Dr. Morrison said with growing curiosity. Have we met at previous foundation events? I'm Victoria Sterling, Victoria replied, moving into the presentation mode that had once defined her professional identity. I founded and built Sterling Fashion Group from a small Chicago startup into a $1.2 billion international corporation before walking away to focus on my deaf children's needs. This center represents the convergence of my business expertise and my personal understanding of what families navigating communication differences actually require. The room's energy shifted palpably as board members absorbed the implications of Victoria Sterling's involvement. This wasn't just another hopeful proposal, but a project backed by proven corporate leadership and strategic planning expertise. Victoria approached Marcus's architectural drawings with confident precision, her movements betraying years of high-level presentation experience. These designs aren't merely about accommodation or traditional charity models. They represent a fundamental paradigm shift toward recognizing deaf children as a distinct cultural community with valuable contributions rather than a medical problem requiring expensive solutions. She gestured to specific, innovative elements in the plans with growing passion. The educational components could generate sustainable revenue streams through partnership contracts with school districts seeking inclusive programming. The therapeutic approaches could be researched and published, contributing to academic understanding while attracting federal research funding. Most importantly, the architectural innovations could be licensed to other cities wanting to replicate our community building model. You're proposing a replicable pilot program with national scaling potential, board member Jennifer Walsh observed with obvious interest. I'm proposing, Victoria continued with the intensity that had once made her legendary in corporate negotiations, that we stop treating deaf children like broken hearing children and start building communities where visual communication and auditory communication have equal value and institutional support. Marcus Williams understands this principle because his architecture doesn't attempt to fix anyone. It creates spaces where different forms of human communication can flourish simultaneously and symbiotically. Dr. Morrison studied the drawings with renewed attention and growing excitement. Mr. Williams, please walk us through your specific design philosophy. How would these spaces function practically for both deaf and hearing children in integrated educational settings? Marcus stepped forward, his confidence building as professional expertise overrode years of self-imposed exile from architectural practice. Traditional therapeutic facilities operate on medical models that treat deafness as deficiency requiring correction through intervention, he explained, his hands moving expressively as professional passion reignited. This design operates on cultural models that treat American Sign Language as a complete communication system, deserving architectural support and environmental enhancement. He pointed to innovative design elements that revealed sophisticated understanding of deaf spatial needs. Visual alert systems integrated seamlessly into the lighting architecture, rather than added as obvious afterthoughts. Acoustic engineering that enhances rather than competes with visual communication patterns. Spatial arrangements specifically designed to support group conversations in sign language rather than forcing adaptation to spoken communication norms that exclude deaf participants. The educational integration components? James Chen prompted with growing interest. Completely immersive classrooms where deaf and hearing children learn together as equals, Marcus explained with building enthusiasm. Both spoken English and ASL serve as official languages of instruction. Extensive research demonstrates that hearing children who learn sign language develop significantly enhanced visual spatial processing abilities, while deaf children in truly integrated environments show superior academic achievement across all subject areas compared to segregated or mainstreamed alternatives. Victoria watched Marcus present his vision with restored professional confidence. Seeing the innovative architect he'd been before tragedy convinced him to hide his considerable talents behind a security guard's uniform and emotional walls. The financial projections, Dr. Morrison consulted her tablet, indicate break-even within 4 years through educational contracts, therapeutic services, and research partnerships. These numbers seem remarkably optimistic for a startup venture. Conservative estimates, actually, Victoria replied with the precision that had once made her legendary among Chicago investors. Sterling Fashion Group's corporate foundation has committed to providing matching funds beyond the Morrison Foundation's initial investment. Additionally, I have confirmed preliminary interest from 6 other major Chicago foundations who have expressed genuine enthusiasm for supporting this innovative approach to inclusive education and community building. The room fell silent as board members processed the implications of Victoria Sterling's substantial corporate backing combined with Marcus Williams' architectural expertise and passion. Victoria could see calculations being made, potential being assessed, the kind of strategic thinking that transformed ambitious ideas into funded reality. But before Dr. Morrison could respond, the conference room door opened unexpectedly with dramatic timing that Victoria recognized immediately. "I apologize for this interruption," said a familiar voice that made Victoria's blood run cold with recognition. "But I believe this distinguished board should have complete information before making such significant funding decisions." Richard Sterling entered the room with a commanding presence that had made him one of Chicago's most feared and respected attorneys, accompanied by the same professional woman who had documented their playground encounter weeks earlier. "Richard," Victoria said, her voice steady despite her racing heart and the familiar dread his presence always triggered. "What exactly are you doing here?" "Protecting my children's best interests," Richard replied smoothly, his tone conveying reasonable parental concern rather than threatening legal maneuvering. "Dr. Morrison, I'm Richard Sterling, family law attorney and father of the children who would presumably be among the first students at this proposed educational facility. I have serious concerns about the project's leadership structure and their fitness to oversee such an important community institution." Dr. Morrison looked between Victoria and Richard with obvious confusion and growing discomfort. "Mr. Sterling, this is highly irregular procedure." "What's irregular?" Richard continued with the practiced legal precision that had made his reputation. "Is a woman who abandoned substantial corporate responsibilities by walking away from a billion-dollar company because she couldn't handle the stress of raising special needs children, now presenting herself as an advocate and leader for similar families facing comparable challenges. Victoria felt the room's energy shift as Richard's words landed with calculated strategic impact on the foundation board members. Furthermore, Richard continued relentlessly, her current romantic involvement with a man whose architectural negligence resulted in multiple deaths raises serious questions about judgment, professional competence, and risk assessment capabilities. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying firm conviction. Mr. Sterling, that characterization of events is completely inaccurate. Is it? Richard smoothly pulled out a prepared legal folder with theatrical precision. Fire at the Williams Design Pediatric Facility, multiple casualties including his own wife, lawsuits settled out of court to avoid potential criminal prosecution for professional negligence. And this is the man Victoria Sterling wants to entrust with other people's children's welfare and educational development? Victoria watched the foundation board members' expressions transform from enthusiasm to concern to doubt as Richard's strategic attack on their credibility gained momentum. His approach was surgically precise: attack professional competence, raise safety concerns, create reasonable doubt about their fitness for such significant responsibility. But as Victoria looked around the conference room, at Marcus, whose architectural vision could transform hundreds of children's lives, at the innovative drawings that represented hope rather than accommodation, at the possibility of building something genuinely meaningful from the wreckage of their previous lives, she realized that this confrontation wasn't about defending their past decisions. It was about choosing to create a different future. Richard, Victoria said, her voice carrying the authority that had once commanded corporate empires and intimidated seasoned executives, you're absolutely right about one fundamental point. I did walk away from Sterling Fashion Group and substantial corporate success. She moved to the center of the room, addressing the foundation board directly with the confidence that had once made her legendary in business negotiations. But not because I couldn't handle having deaf children, because I refused to see Emma and Noah as problems requiring expensive solutions or inconvenient obstacles to professional advancement. Victoria, Richard began with warning tone. I'm not finished, Victoria continued with building intensity and passion. 4 years ago, my ex-husband gave me an impossible ultimatum: abandon our children's actual needs to pursue experimental treatments that might make them more normal, or lose our marriage and financial security. I chose to end our marriage instead, because Emma and Noah weren't broken. She gestured toward the architectural drawings with growing conviction. I built a billion-dollar company from absolutely nothing because I understood that genuine innovation comes from seeing opportunities and human potential where others see only problems requiring correction. These architectural plans represent exactly the same principle: spaces designed around children's actual developmental needs, rather than adults' preconceptions about those needs and limitations. Victoria looked directly at Marcus, then back to the board. And yes, Marcus Williams experienced unimaginable tragedy when criminal contractor negligence caused a fire that killed his wife. Instead of hiding from that devastating experience, he's channeling it into designs that could prevent similar tragedies while serving children far better than any existing institutional approach. Dr. Morrison leaned forward with renewed interest. Ms. Sterling, these are serious allegations about professional competence. They're also completely irrelevant to our project's merit, Victoria said firmly, her voice carrying the conviction that had once convinced skeptical investors to fund revolutionary business concepts. Because the fundamental question isn't whether Marcus and I have experienced profound loss and made difficult personal choices. The question is whether we can create something genuinely valuable and transformative from those experiences for other families. She pulled out her phone and displayed a video that Emma had recorded the previous week. Lucas, Emma, and Noah playing together in their modest apartment, communicating through a fluid blend of sign language, creative gestures, and spontaneous laughter that needed no translation. That's my daughter teaching Marcus's son the sign for family, Victoria said quietly, her voice carrying emotion, but also unwavering determination. Not because we're perfect people with unblemished professional histories, but because we're absolutely committed to building spaces where children like ours can thrive academically, socially, and emotionally. Lucas's clear voice emerged from the video recording. Miss Emma says families aren't just people who sound the same or look the same. They're people who understand each other and never give up trying. The silence that followed was profound and transformative. Dr. Morrison studied the architectural drawings again, with obvious renewed interest, then looked at Victoria and Marcus with something that resembled decision and growing respect. Mr. Sterling, Dr. Morrison said finally with diplomatic but firm authority, I appreciate your concerns for your children's welfare and educational development. However, the Morrison Foundation bases funding decisions on project merit, leadership competence, and potential community impact, not on personal family disputes or past professional setbacks that have been legally resolved. She stood and addressed Victoria directly with growing enthusiasm. Miss Sterling, Mr. Williams, the Morrison Foundation is prepared to approve full funding for the Williams Sterling Communication Center. $14.6 million over 3 years, with clearly defined performance milestones and expansion opportunities based on measurable community impact and educational outcomes. Victoria felt tears she hadn't realized she was holding back. Relief and vindication mixing with something that felt like coming home to her authentic self after years of deliberate professional exile. However, Dr. Morrison continued with businesslike precision, we want both of you actively involved in hands-on leadership roles. Ms. Sterling as Executive Director and Community Liaison Coordinator, Mr. Williams as Chief Architect and Facility Development Director. This revolutionary project needs both your proven business expertise and your deeply personal commitment to succeed beyond our most optimistic projections. Marcus looked at Victoria across the conference table, his expression mixing disbelief with hope and something that looked like genuine healing from professional exile. Partners? Partners, Victoria agreed, feeling pieces of her life aligning in ways she'd never imagined when she first walked away from corporate success. Richard remained standing by the conference room door, his strategic confidence replaced by something that looked like recognition, not defeat exactly, but understanding that the dynamics had shifted fundamentally beyond his control. 6 months, he said finally, his voice softer than Victoria had heard it in years. I want to observe this project's actual development, see how it serves the children's genuine educational and social needs rather than adult idealism about inclusion and community building. Absolutely fair, Victoria replied with generous confidence. But your observation includes comprehensive sign language instruction. If you want to understand Emma and Noah's educational experience, you need to communicate fluently in their primary language. Richard's smile was rueful but genuinely respectful. I suppose I've earned that requirement through years of willful ignorance. As they filed out of the Morrison Foundation offices, Lucas tugged Victoria's sleeve and proudly held up a new drawing. The Williams Sterling Communication Center, as he imagined it, filled with children who looked like Emma, Noah, and himself, all of them signing, learning, and belonging together in architectural spaces, designed specifically for their flourishing. Families aren't just born into existence, he said in his clear, brave voice that had emerged through love and patient encouragement. They're built by people who love each other enough to keep trying, even when it's difficult. 2 years later, the Williams Sterling Communication Center held its dedication ceremony in a revolutionary building that redefined what inclusive architecture could accomplish for diverse communities. The event was conducted seamlessly in both spoken English and American Sign Language, with families from across the Midwest gathering to witness something unprecedented. A space designed not to accommodate difference, but to celebrate the full spectrum of human communication as equally valuable and essential. Victoria Sterling Williams stood with her husband and their 3 children, Emma, Noah, and Lucas, watching as families explored classrooms where deaf and hearing children learned together as equals, therapy rooms designed like comfortable homes rather than sterile medical facilities, and an innovative playground where visual communication systems were integrated naturally into every piece of equipment. Richard Sterling was there too, his ASL improving steadily through dedicated weekly practice sessions with his children, his relationship with Emma and Noah growing stronger as he learned to see their deafness not as limitation requiring correction, but as a different and valuable way of experiencing and contributing to the world. The center's mission statement, carved in both English and ASL into the lobby's beautiful stone wall, read simply, "Every voice matters, especially the silent ones." And in the therapeutic garden behind the building, 5 members of the Williams family created new games that required no spoken words at all, just open hearts, willing hands, and the courage to keep building love from whatever materials life provided. One conversation at a time, one sign at a time, one family at a time. Creating community that proved the most beautiful architecture was designed around human connection rather than conventional expectations.